AP Computer Science A FRQ. You want to make sure that you read through the entire prompt before you get started. Now remember that whenever you call in your code on your Replit, you are having the luxury of testing it, whether on your AP exam you actually just have to kind of trust your instincts and trust that you know how to do the algorithms. In this case, we have part A, B, and C. So this question involves the process of taking a list of words. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 words, 4 strings in a list called word list. And you're going to be producing a formatted string of a specified length. In this case, the specified length is 20. Notice that you're going to have to implement 3 methods. The first one that you're going to implement, you're going to be able to count how many letters are in all the strings within the list. So in this case, we have 2, 4, 3, and 5, so a total of 14. The number of gaps between each of the words, so since you have 4 words, that means that you're going to have 1, 2, 3. If you have 5 words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that means that you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 gaps, and so on. So something to keep in mind. Now the basic gap width is 2. So notice in this case we have 3 gaps, but in each gap there are 2 spaces in between. In the next example you have 4 words, 4 strings, 15 words on total. You have 3 gaps, and you have 20 minus 15 is 5, but you only have 3 gaps. That means that each of them will get 1. That is the basic gap. And you have 2 spaces, as the description says, from left to right. You're going to add 1 extra space here, 1 extra space here, and there's nothing left over. On the next example, you have 2 words, 2 strings in your list. There is a total of 9 words. You only have 1 gap. You have 20 minus 9 is 11, so therefore you have 11 spaces as your basic graph. There's nothing left over. But let's go through part A. On part A, it says write the string formatter method total letters. So in this case, total letters is here, which is going to return the total number of letters in the words in its parameter word list. So the parameter that they are providing for you is a list of strings called word list. And you're going to return an integer. Now, this is a static method. Do you guys remember what static method means? Yes, you don't have to construct an object of the class. You don't have to create an instance of the class. And notice in this case, string formatter does not even have a constructor. So therefore, the methods have to be static in order to be able to access them. So we just basically need to be able to count how many letters are in each word. So work on it and see what you get. And then we can code it together afterwards. Correct. So we need to have a counter. And we're going to declare initialize it to 0. Then I need to decide whether I want to be able to have a for each loop or a regular for loop. Remember, if you're doing a for each loop, that means that you have to go through each of the words in your list. In this case, we do need to go through each one, so I'm just going to do a for each loop. What is the type that the list has? They're strings. I'm going to create a simple letter, so there'll be the words. So I'm going to do W. Actually, the strings are S. And the name of the list or the array list, in this case, this is a list, so the name is word list. And I'm just going to count. I'm going to increase my counter by the number of letters in each word. So it'll be S dot length. Remember that if you only have one statement in your for loop or for each loop, you do not need the braces, even though some people do prefer to place the braces in there. In this case, if I have only one and I should double check or make sure, I do not need my braces. And remember that it's asking you to return an integer. So if you do not return the integer, they're going to take 1 point out of 4 to return counter. And that's part A. Now let's continue part B. Write the string formatter method basic gap, which is here, which returns the basic gap width as defined earlier. Before we go back and see, you always want to be able to read this part of your prompt. Assume the total letters work as regardless of what you wrote on part A. So don't worry whether this works or not. We're going to assume that it does. You must use total letters appropriately to receive full credit. So if you do not use total letters, you will not get full credit for this question. And once again, there's a static method. It's going to return an integer. Basic gap width is the name of the parameter. The signature is the list. The parameter is going to be a list of strings called word list. In formatted length, it will be the total length of the string that you're formatting. So let's go back to an example above. So you're going to calculate the basic gap width. In this case, the formatted length is 20. So how did they come up with 2? Correct. So in this case, there are 20 minus 14 will give you 6. And you have 3 gaps, so therefore going to divide by 3, which gives you 2. Notice that on the next one, there's a length will be 20 for each one. There are 15 letters, and there are 3 gaps, so it'll be 20 minus 15 gives you 5. You're going to divide by 3, and it gives you 2.6. But in this case, it's an integer. It's actually 1.6. It's an integer, so it's just going to return 1. And that's how they get here. So that is the method that we're going to use. Now in this case, it's a simple operation, so I'm just going to do it in one part. And you have to be careful if you do it in a return statement with a lot of operations in between, to have enough parentheses to make sure that you're doing it correctly, the order of operations. So it's going to be the total length of the string, which is formatted length, minus the total number of letters, which is calculated in this method. So we're going to call this method here, which is called total letters, and that's what's requiring you within your part B. Now this is a method that is going to return an integer, which will be here. But the parameter that it needs is the word list. Now the word list is coming in here as a parameter, so therefore your argument in here is just going to send it here. And notice that you only need one parameter, so therefore you just need one argument. So something to keep in mind is that the word list is coming in here as a parameter, and then you're going to send it over to this method so you can calculate how many letters there are, since you've already done the work here. Divided by, and we're going to divide it by the number of gaps. Now, how do we calculate the number of gaps? Correct, there are 4 words, so we have 3 gaps. If there were 5 words, there'll be 4 gaps. If there are 2 words, there's only 1 gap. So it'll be the word list, which is the size, minus 1. And that'll be it for part B. Now let's continue part C. On part C, It says write the string formatting method called format. And format is over here, which returns the format string as defined. So that this is going to return the format string that we've been looking at. Now the string format also contains a method called leftover spaces. So notice that the implementation is not shown. So even though you can see it here, you can ignore it because it's not something that you're going to be able to use the actual implementation. You won't be able to see it on the test. We know that it's going to take two parameters, word list and formatted length, and it's going to return an integer and it's a static class, a static method. So what's going to be your strategy for this method? So therefore, for this method, what we want to do, we want to be able to call on, and actually let's look at the next set of instructions because that gives you more information. So assume that the basic gap method works as specified as part B and part A as well. You must use basic gap width and leftover spaces to be able to receive full credit. Remember, basic gap width is going to return how many spaces are in between each of the words. And leftover spaces is going to tell you how many spaces are left that will have to be distributed from left to right. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get the leftover spaces. So therefore, I'm going to create an integer. So I'm going to declare an integer and just going to call leftover. And I'm going to get the integer, I'm going to call this method called leftover spaces. It takes two parameters, word list and format length, which basically are coming into this method. So therefore I can just pass it over, word list and formatted length. I also need to be able to use my basic gap width that I already have implemented above, which is going to return the basic gap width as described here. So therefore I'm just going to call int, I'm just going to call it gap. How many gaps there or was the basic gap width, whether it's 1, 11, or 2. Basic gap width. And now what does that going to take in? That's going to be the word list and the format length as well. So that's going to take both arguments that I need to send in. So now I need to be able to develop a plan. So I know that the words are here and I'm going to place the first one here and then deal with the spaces. And if there's, as I deal with the spaces, if there's any leftover spaces, I need to place one by one until I run out. And running out is the keyword, correct? So before I actually start that, I know that gap is going to return an integer. So if the gap is 3, I need to be able to create a 1, 2, 3. If the gap is 4, I need to create 4. So I'm going to do a for loop. Until I is less than gap, and I'm going to increase I. And I want to be able to place, so I'm going to create a string called gap space. And I'm going to create empty string. I'm just going to add, if the 3, I want to go through this loop 3 times and add spaces in there. So gap space plus equal and just a space in there. So therefore, if this is 5, I'm going to add 5. This will be 5 spaces once I'm done with this for loop. Now I'm going to go through a for loop so I can go through each of the words and add the spaces in between. So before int I equal to 0, I is less than all the words in there, so be word list dot length or size. Size for a list, from my I plus plus. And then I'm going to add the first word. So I have I created a string where I'm going to be placing them? No. So I'm going to create a string called phrase or final phrase or final string. And I need to declare it. I also need to initialize it as well. And now I'm going to start by adding the first word in there. So I'll be final string plus equal, and it'll be word list dot get I. So when it starts, I is 0, so I'll add the first word in there. There I'm going to add the space. So therefore final, and I'm going to do two different steps. I can probably combine both of them together on gap space, but this will be easier to read. Now, since I have more than one statement in my for loop, I want to make sure that I do my braces, so that both of them get included. Now, my leftover space, let's assume there's 3. So I need to add for the first one, for the second one, for the third one, but not for the fourth one. So if leftover, I'm going to make an if statement. If leftover is greater than 0, I'm going to add an extra space. So final string plus equals space. But then I need to subtract 1 from leftover. And since I have 2 statements in there, I need to have a brace to include both of them. So therefore, it's going to go to the first one, add my spaces, to the second one, add my spaces, to the third one, add the spaces, next one. But then he adds spaces at the very end. I actually want the word to be the last. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add the last word, I'm going to add it over here. Final string plus equal. It'll be word less. And the very last one is going to be get word less that size minus 1. Correct? Because if this is the, let's say this is the fourth word, the index will be 4 minus 1 will be 3. But since I'm adding the last one here, I want to make sure that I don't add, I have to go 1 less over here. Now sometimes it might be easier to add it first here, the first one, and then deal with it later. Either one, it works fine. And I believe that's it. Let me just double check that my columns here, my braces are correctly placed. And what else do I need to do? Correct. I need to return my string. And that's something that you might forget on your AP exam, so just be careful. So I need to return final string. And let's see how many errors I might have. Oh, let's see, line 62. Yeah, with lowercase p. Cannot find word list. Dot get. And that is 78. That's not world, but it's word list. And let me just double check my results. So there you go. That's part that's 2016. Things to keep in mind is that you want to make sure that you always have your return statements if that's something that you expect to be returned. Email me your code if you have any questions, and I'll see you guys next time.